According to officials, when they arrived, the gunman immediately began shooting. The suspect and another person were also killed. At least 4 others were injured. CNN's Whitney Wild has the latest. Whitney, what are you learning this morning?
Well, John, there's still a lot of open questions, but let me walk you through the timeline as we know it right now. We believe that this all unfolded around 5:15 Central Time in Minneapolis when law enforcement got this call for shots fired at an apartment complex in a Minneapolis neighborhood called the Whittier neighborhood. And when law enforcement arrived to that initial shots fired call, they were immediately met with gunfire. And this is where the story gets a little fuzzy, John, because some of the details are just not clear. What we know is that there was this exchange of gunfire at this apartment complex, but Officer Jamal Mitchell was responding, and he actually came upon someone that he thought needed medical assistance, but that was 1 to 2 blocks away from that initial scene. So Officer Jamal Mitchell gets out of his car, tries to render aid to someone that, again, he thought needed medical assistance, someone he thought he could help save their life.
But that it happened very fast and that he ambushed him. I'm using the term for a reason. I've seen the video, and he was ambushed at the time by this individual that was there.
He is being remembered, as you said, as a hero. And John, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about Officer Jamal Mitchell. His courageousness was on display the day he took this job. It just so happens that last March, March 2023, CNN featured him in a piece because he and his partner ran into a burning building to save an elderly couple. John, the day he did that, he had only been on the job for 3 days. That is how courageous and brave and really admirable Officer Jamal Mitchell is, and why it is such a tragic loss for the Minneapolis Police Department. The governor of Minnesota was quick to point out that in Minnesota, this is becoming a horrifying trend. There have been 4 incidents of first responders trying to respond to 911 calls, trying to save people's lives, and being ambushed. It was recently that other first responders were shot and killed in Minnesota. The governor of Minnesota saying this cannot be the norm, John.
So sad. Our thoughts with Officer Mitchell's family. Whitney Wild, thank you very much for that. Kate?
That is so horrible. It's those details. That is so sad. We're also tracking this today. Secretary of State Tony Blinken expected to speak next hour in Prague, where he is meeting with NATO counterparts. This is as President Biden has made a major policy shift when it comes to Ukraine, now saying it will allow Ukraine to use American weapons to strike inside Russia. CNN's Alex Marquardt has more. Alex, this is a big policy shift. What are the limitations to it?
Well, it is limited, but it is a significant shift, Kate. Until now, Ukraine has not been allowed to use U.S. weapons in carrying out strikes inside Russia. They have been carrying out lots of strikes inside Russia, but using primarily their own weapons. Now, President Biden is saying they can use U.S. weapons, and that's because Russia has been making advances on the battlefield, primarily around the northeastern city of Kharkiv, the second biggest city in Ukraine. Russia launched a new offensive back on May 10th, and in the days that followed, senior Ukrainian officials made a direct appeal to top Biden officials to loosen those restrictions, to be allowed to use those weapons against Russian staging areas just on the other side of the border. And those officials, the Americans, thought that made sense. They took it to the president. He agreed with that recommendation, and it finally went into effect just yesterday. So this is something that has been in the works. This is an area where the U.S. has been feeling quite a bit of international pressure from the French, from the Germans, from the head of NATO, who spoke earlier today. Take a listen.
Russia has attacked another country, violated in international law, invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine has the right for self-defense, and that includes also the right to strike legitimate military targets inside Russia.
So, Kate, the reason that these restrictions have been in place is because the U.S. has been worried about provoking Russia more, about escalating this conflict. There are significant restrictions that are still in place. Ukraine cannot fire anywhere they want to. They cannot use any weapon they want to. They can't use the most formidable missile that the U.S. has given to Ukraine, which is called an ATACMS. It can go some 200 miles. It has been used to great effect inside Russian-occupied areas, including Crimea, and that's where we're seeing a lot of fighting. We have some new video of Ukraine Ukrainian forces attacking Russian ships in the Black Sea using sea drones. And so they really have been taking the fight to the Russians in that area, both with Ukrainian domestically made weapons as well as.
It will be interesting to hear from the Secretary of State, as we expect to hear from him in the next hour. Alex, thank you so much for bringing us all that detail. John.
All right, we are standing by as new reaction to the guilty verdict against Donald Trump continues to come in this morning. Donald Trump's former White House National Security Advisor, John Bolton, posted on Twitter, or X as it's now called, "Today's verdict is a fire bell in the night. The Republican Party now has one last chance to change course and not nominate a convicted felon for president." Ambassador John Bolton joins me now. Ambassador, what are you doing here? What was that about?
Well, I think it's going to be a big mistake for the party, for the country to nominate Donald Trump, precisely because he may well win this election. I'm not going to vote for Biden either, but I think if there's any chance left to get somebody else to replace Trump, which is highly unlikely to be sure, this ought to signal it to people. We've never nominated a convicted felon before, and this is not a good time to start.
You don't actually think there will be a change, do you?
No, but I think people of conscience ought to be thinking about how to approach this. You've heard a lot of criticism of the case on this network the day the indictment came down. I said if Trump is elected, it could be because of this case. But the fact is you've had 12 jurors find him guilty. And that is going to reverberate with a lot of Americans who are not part of the Trump base. And it could endanger not only the country if Trump gets elected, it could endanger other Republicans on the ballot in November.
So now I know it's hard to hurt your feelings. I'm not asking about that. But what do you think this type of reaction to what you wrote says?
Sure. Look, Trump himself has said he's going to run a retribution presidency. He said Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, should be in jail for treason and maybe even hung for calling his Chinese counterpart in connection with January the 6th. And I think that's a real danger. You know, as far as these comments go, I've been vilified by Donald Trump himself. I don't really care about the little leagues.
Having Larry Hogan win there would be a huge step. So Larry Hogan writes last night, regardless of the result, I urge all Americans to respect the verdict and the legal process. He then goes on.
Bob Boss speaking. And that's the way Trump has performed in his business for many, many years. To me, it's less now about this conviction than about Trump's lack of character. Look, all of us have character flaws, myself included, except Donald Trump, because he doesn't have a character to have flaws in. And that is really the concern I have for the party. I just take issue with one thing you said